Alrighty guys, my stuff says that I'm live, but I am using new software, and as always, it's great if somebody shouts out that they can hear me. Otherwise, it feels like I'm just talking to a brick wall, which, if we're being honest, I spend enough time doing anyway that I think I'll be okay. This is my live stream for October 5th, 2021, and thanks for anybody who took the time to check in. I had an interesting question asked tangentially in the comments recently. Hey, Flaherty Rick, thanks, man. Essentially, the question was, do I think that prisons should be good places, nice places where people just kick back and have fun? Should people suffer in prison? Should they be punished? I remember having an argument with somebody in the CDC, a good friend of mine, Mr. Fisher, and he was a smart guy. And his argument was no, that because he believed human suffering was bad, prisons should be the best place we can make them. Of course, he was a smart guy, so he understood that tax dollars were a conversation, and the whole sentence was the best place we can make them for as cheap as we can, because taxpayers should not be paying for prisoners to have a good time. Empire 344, thanks for tuning in, man. This was his contention, and he used a religious argument, essentially, that suffering is bad, and so being nice to people is good. And if everybody was nice to everybody in prison, then it would be a better place. He was a Buddhist, and his argument was far more complex because he was a very well-educated in that field, but that was the core of his argument whenever we broke it down, was nobody should want places to be bad. It's sadism, essentially, but what about deterrence? And this was my response, is, let's imagine that we make prisons the best place they can be. That's great for the people in prison. It's even great for the guys getting out, but what about the whole rest of society? Forget the tax dollars. Let's imagine it's free. Bill Gates or somebody decides that he wants to invest his entire fortune into making prisons in, let's just say, California, so he has enough money to do it. The nicest in the world and the best in the world, so it doesn't cost taxpayers $1. Well, still, you can't just give everybody big screen TVs and all the drugs they want, and whenever they parole, you accomplished anything. All you did is guarantee that whenever they get out, they're going to tell their friends about how awesome prison was. And it speaks to the difference between this idea of happiness and contentment, the things that you want and the things that you should receive. It's gifts that a father figure, a paternal figure, his job is to stand tall until you behave or you will be punished. This is a logical idea. I'm not suggesting it's the right way for a father to act. You act how you want with your kid. I know I do. But there's this idea that a paternal influence will say you must act the right way or you will be punished. And a maternal influence will reward you and prop you up regardless. And they liken this to society. They liken this to prisons even. Is it supposed to be authoritative or authoritarian? How much kindness can you show? Some countries in Europe look like their prisons are pretty laid back, and I'm absolutely going to speak on that. I need to go ahead and put in a preface, is I'm going to go ahead and toss out some facts and general ideas. Well, I did some reading, and I think this. I read some Wikipedia articles. I did read a book or two back when, but I'm not an expert. I have thought about this a lot, though, and there are a lot of laid-back prisons. Sweden, I was just reading about. And they also have a problem that is increasing with recidivism. Because before, you could toss more tax dollars into the system. And if you have enough money, you have people that are willing to cooperate, a good chunk of the time, people can be rehabilitated. I have good friends, some who I have to write, I owe letters so bad, that are still locked up, who I would honestly let move into my home. with my wife and children. And I'm not saying they can, because my wife and my children might have different opinions, but I trust them. I mean, I'd sleep in the same room with them. I trust them. I love them. And they're rehabilitated to the best of my knowledge. That doesn't mean they are rehabilitated, though, because all they have to do is be better liars than I am at seeing that somebody is a liar, and I could be being conned. And sure, I'm just a private citizen, and somebody like the parole board or the governor, they're far less likely to be conned, but it happens. There have been cases where people obviously shouldn't have gotten out of prison, and they were let out because that's the law, that's the rule. I recall reading about a gentleman who had he was the most prolific serial killer by the Guinness records, and he bragged about it. And then, well, his parole came up, and it was time to let him out. And he disappeared, and they believe he killed more people. Perhaps he did, perhaps he didn't. And I don't even mean that case specifically. I remember an occasion where I had a counselor come by for my annual. One time a year, you get an annual, and it's a little thing. Nobody cares. But this is your time whenever you're going to talk to the captain, the CC2, the warden, if it's an ICC. There's actual ranking members of staff. And this is your chance to say, hey, guys, I want to move to another prison. I don't like it here. Hey, guys, I had an idea for a program. What if you guys did this? Every inmate in the prison gets their 5 minutes of fame once a year. Most people just sign on the dotted line. I don't want to talk to the captain or the warden or anybody, because it's an imposition to them. It's an imposition to you. And if you don't have any major program changes, who cares? You just want to do your time. Especially if you're trying to get away with stuff, the last thing you want to do is commit that a week from now you're going to go in and talk to the captain and all the staff if you don't know what you're going to be doing a week from now. You don't know what you're going to have done a couple of days from now, so that you're still high when you go in there. Of course, there's far less sinister reasons for people to not want to go into the ICC and the UCC, the classification committees where you get your 5 minutes of fame once a year. Counselor came around to me and, hey, I'd like to go, actually. This is always an imposition. They don't want to. Okay, fine, you want to go here, sign on the line. Why are you going? You need to transfer. You're not happy with your job. What are you doing here? Your points aren't dropping. You're not going to another prison. So why do you want to talk? I say, oh, well, the issue is that I have all of these meritorious certificates. I have college programs. I have religious programs. I have letters from staff. And I just want to make sure they're in my file. Can we do that? Like, I give them to the committee and they put them in my file, because it was supposed to happen at what they call it, a Morrison, a Murphy? I don't remember. Goes, G channel, that's an imposition. Sure, go ahead. We'll do that. But why? I said, well, you never know. Maybe they'll let me out a couple of weeks early, a month or two early, because I did all this stuff. I had 13 years left at this point. He chuckled and went, you know what? Sure, go ahead. Why not? That's a smart thing to do just in case. And after all of those years, I did, in fact, get about 6 months and knocked off the tail end of my sentence for my associate's degree, which was awesome. But he went to literally the next cell, because he's just doing his rounds. He's a counselor, and he has a list of people he has to talk to. The next guy's going to get his 5 minutes of fame. Inmates are a nosy bunch. I stand at the door. I listen. Guy literally tells the counselor, I don't care. I'm getting out in like a month and a half. I'm not doing an annual. Counselor goes, yeah, sure, no problem. Here, sign on the dotted line. You have to sign to say that you don't want to go in front of these people, because it is your right to do so, and due process and all that. The counselor and he are talking, and he's literally telling the counselor about how he's going to get out, and his friend already has some stuff lined up for him, and he's probably just going to straight abscond. And the counselor's looking and talking to him and going, you've only got a year left. You could max out it rather than abscond. And they're laughing about it. Because the counselor, the same way he had no discretion to reduce my sentence, to say, gosh, Channel, you're really trying, aren't you? Instead, he had to kind of laugh and go, wow, you're really trying, aren't you? Well, he went to the next door, and he's not biased. He has no discretion. This next guy told him, oh, I'm going to hurt society whenever I get out. I'll find a way. I'm going to cost the taxpayers. And you'll see me again in a couple of months. Don't worry. Those weren't his exact words, but the counselor is criminally sophisticated. He deals with criminals all day long. He knows what it means. Remember, the guy's joking about how he's going to go cross country with his friend and get high. But he has no discretion. The guy's already just about maxed out. He can do whatever he wants. Why would the counselor bother getting involved in this thing either? So he kind of laughs the same way he did with me. I had been so upset whenever he talked to me because he was so dismissive about the thing that I'd worked a year for, and I did work. I mean, I worked. I wanted to get out of prison. I think everybody in there does. And he was dismissive about the idea that I wanted 5 minutes of effort from him for the year of work that I had done. And so I'd kind of walked away from the door seething, and then I'd heard that next conversation. Okay, so it was nothing about me. It's not even a matter of him doing his job. It's just that he has no discretion. Why would he bother? I guess if he really stomped his foot, if he had told his boss and his boss's boss, hey, that guy Channel and such cell, we need to talk about him. Or he could have said the exact same thing about the next guy over, the guy who's going to go cross country with his friend. We'll call him DUI Jim. He could have went into that there too, and he could have, we need to talk about DUI Jim. This is important. Well, there's 5 counselors on a yard. There's about 1,000 inmates who are housed on a yard at a given time, but they're always coming and going, and the counselor's got to talk to the guy when he first gets to the yard and whenever he leaves the yard. It's the same story as with public defenders. It's the same story as with everything else. Hi, Rudy Castro. Because I happen to know that my wife tries to always watch my live streams, I could really use a glass of water. That's completely tangential to anything else, but I'm going to say it because I'm getting scratchy. Since the counselor has no discretion, there's no point in hiring, let's say, 50 counselors, so that then the counselor only had 20 inmates he was dealing with. Right now, there's 5 counselors. They have 200 inmates they're dealing with, plus all the guys coming and going. So it's more like dealing with 100 inmates per counselor, 500 inmates per counselor, just day in, day out. But if you spent that much more money, literally, let's say 50 times more on that one aspect of rehabilitation, each of these guys pull a salary out of that $8.8 billion that CDC was charging the taxpayers to keep me and people like me in prison. Even if you do that, then you're still going to have the problem that the counselors are going to occasionally stomp their foot and tell their boss's boss, because they can, hey, I want to talk about inmate such and such. He's one of the guys under my purview. And since I only have 5 people under my purview, I have the time to talk about him, and I think he should get let out early. And everyone agrees because it makes sense, but it just turns out that inmate such and such is a better liar than that counselor is at picking up on the BS, and that inmate was willing to put in the extra effort. He converted to fill in the blank religion, and he apologized to his victim's family for the thing he did. His name's DUI Jim, so I'm willing to bet it probably involved a DUI. And he gets out and does it again because he wasn't sorry, and he laughs in the court about, oh, you pieces of garbage, you believed me? And he does something awful. He hits a bus full of senior citizens and little children and nuns, and everybody dies. Then we need to start swinging that pendulum the other way and say, well, we need to be harsher on criminals. Lock them all up forever, especially DUI Jim and his cohorts. But decisions that are made... 1 second, please. Oh, thank you, wife. Decisions that are made in the heat of emotion like that, either by a society or an individual. This awful thing happened. We need to do something. Lock them up forever. Okay, well, let's go ahead and imagine that other side. Bill Gates still has that, all those billions of dollars he said that he'd spend on prisons, and we can spend it however we want. So now we're going to spend it locking them up. How about literally forever? 1 strike and you're out. And I mean it too. Rest of your life. We have the money. We'll just build giant tract housing prisons. Well, that's essentially what the Gulag Archipelago was, well, let's just keep building prisons and then let's make them work to build more prisons. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote on this beautifully in a number of his books, of course, the Gulag Archipelago, but the one that I recommend is One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, because it gives a real commentary into the way that inmates think and the issues they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, in spite of the fact that it was set in Soviet Russia during a terrible political purge. And that's essentially what we're talking about. Mind you, we're talking about a far more humane version of it. We don't have people working in the snow to build the prisons they're living in. Bill Gates built them. Great. But all you're doing is just housing them for the rest of their lives. You've taken some degree of meaning out of it because you say they cannot rehabilitate themselves. One strike and you're out. We can't risk that you're a better liar than our counselor, the guy whose job it is to figure out if you're lying about being ready to get out of prison, whether you really tried. We don't know if you're a better liar than he is at picking up on it. So one strike and you're out. Stay in prison for the rest of your life. We'll make it as comfortable as we can, but you never get out. All right, well, I guess that works, and we'll have prisons full of people who work at call centers or something like that, and we will have a society outside of those walls. Maybe we'll wall off a couple of states that is pretty dang crime-free because it's a totalitarian state. That's what happens under a one-strike-and-you're-out policy. We do not negotiate. Zero tolerance. If you do this one thing one time, you are a bad person. And, of course, there should be some one strikes and you're out. Oh, I was with some guys that should never get out of prison, never, ever. And they only did one thing. Depends on the thing. And this is where we start talking about moderation, that middle path. I believe it was Sweden. I don't have notes written in front of me, but I was reading about a terrible problem in Sweden with sexual assault because they have very light sentencing. They have a very liberal definition of rape, and I'm not saying that isn't a good thing. They essentially say that if you sexually assault a woman, you have raped her, whereas in California and the U.S., we tend to equivocate as to, well, he only did this or well, he only did that. This is, if she didn't consent to the thing you did, and I don't need you to fill in the blank to what it is, you raped her. I keep getting told I'm supposed to not use that word, sexual assault, rape, pedophile, all these things, because it'll mess up my monetization. Whatever. You assaulted her with evil intent, I guess is the phrasing I'm supposed to use nowadays. Yeah, great. I'm fine with some kind of one strike and you're out, or a meter, where if you did something awful, it needs to be really hard to get out of prison. Because the last thing that I want, because I've lost family to crime, completely tangential to anything I'm talking about here, and I knew a lot of people who suffered from crime, both inside and out. I've seen the pain the drugs cause. I've seen the pain that addiction causes, whatever the addiction may be, and there are a lot of different flavors of things that people get addicted to ruin their lives and go to the pen. I like to think of myself as a law and order guy. Even though I was locked up, I often, not always, but often, I saw the guard's point of view more than I saw the inmate's point of view. Well, yeah, of course he's got to make us lock up 15 minutes early. There was a fire down the way. They got to get us in the cell. And that is the idea behind the middle path of moderation here. You can't lock them up forever, because either it costs all that money because Bill Gates paid for it, or you run out of money. And we saw this in Guatemala recently, and horribly. Do you know what happens if you try to keep everybody locked up? You just keep throwing them in prison, but you don't have the funds to pay for it? Well, organized crime steps in because they're willing to pay to keep that prison organized. It becomes a recruiting facility. prisons are great places for gangs to recruit. Just ask anybody in California. And then once you have that little army, well, depending on how much oversight the prison has, if you're lucky and it's someplace like California, where there's a National Guard and there's gunners, a gang war, a couple people die, a dozen people get stabbed. It's terrifying, and maybe you're one of the unlucky ones. But there's no piles of body bags. In the riot last week, and if somebody wants to hear the specifics of the riot, because I'm speaking offhandedly and I don't have any notes, stories written by a current prisoner did an incredible video on it, and Tony really earned his chops as a journalist in covering it. But the issue is that they just had to keep locking up these inmates in these prisons without money in Ecuador. Oh my goodness, I think I might have said Colombia earlier. Somebody please fact check me. I worked today. It's been a long day, and I am speaking off the cuff. I have no disrespect intended to all of the victims if I said the wrong country. And I'm doing a video on this riot because there were 155 killed is the number that I read. I believe 6 were beheaded, 80 wounded. It's some absurd numbers, because the gangs were at war, and that's what a gang war is one is going to stomp out the other. That is a horrific idea because there's no negotiation. It's executions is what it is. That's why there were more dead than wounded, is because whenever one side starts winning, all you do is start backing towards a wall and saying your goodbyes. Crime, criminality, violence, aggression, it's always going to be awful. But if you create prisons that are, I don't know what else that is, that's a hell on earth. It's a recruiting place for gangs, and if you pick the wrong one, you're going to be executed. And you better fight because you don't want to be on the losing side. It's conscription into an army. If you don't have the money to lock those guys up forever, because we don't, they're going to parole. And this is the end of that lock them up forever logic, because we don't have Bill Gates' magic checkbook. It's taxpayer dollars. And that's why they get out eventually. It's why California said, lock them up forever, down in the 80s and 90s until about 95, 96. And then people started saying, well, wait a minute, did you actually mean forever? We're never letting these guys out? That's expensive, isn't it? And it did. It got more and more expensive until finally they ran out of money and the court stepped in, and now all of those guys are paroling, for better or worse. So whenever that tough on crime legislation comes through, do remember the bottom dollar. Because if you're not just taking them out back and hanging them with the same rope, because that is the cheapest way to fix crime. If you want to just get down, forget right and wrong, all I want to do is be safe. Well, hell, forget bullets or electrocution. You can reuse that rope about 100 times, and it don't take a jury but 2 hours to convict. That is the other extreme that you can take the conversation. I am not arguing for or against any of these. It's what I always say is that you can't have simple answers to complex questions. How do you fix crime? How do you make it so my family is safe and my truck doesn't get stolen and my dog doesn't get hurt? That's a fair question. Anybody should be able to ask that in a reasoned society. I work hard. I pay my taxes. Can I be safe? Well, you remember you live in that society, so you are also sacrificing freedoms. That is the other side of the coin whenever you flip it, is safety and freedom. Because you live under the laws that are being enacted, and it may be your son, it may be your friend, it may be you who ends up on the wrong side of some of the tough on crime legislation, and that's the price. I feel that I got a hard sentence from the state. I feel that I was ill done, and I'll speak more about it eventually, I'm sure, but I have no resentment towards any of the parties involved that acted within their purview. The DA, the cops, the guards, the wardens, whoever, they were doing their job. I mean, they didn't single me out and beat me up in the corner because they didn't like the way my hair looked or something. That never happened. But as an example, if they were doing their jobs, cool, because that is the price of a fair system. Innocent men go to prison. Men who are less guilty go to prison. Some people get over-sentenced, more sentenced. It can't be perfectly fair. So whenever you say, I want to be safer, I want harsher laws, well, that is the coin, and you're flipping it, and you're giving up freedom on the other side. And I've heard, I think it was Adams Franklin, he who would give up his freedom for safety deserves neither. Again, that's a simple answer to a complex question. Of course I'll give up some freedom for safety. Dude, I did it in prison. If I had decided, I don't care who comes at me, come at me, bro. All right, well, I could have fought my way through prison. I probably would have had more freedom, as it were, more choice, more ability to do what I wanted to do in a lot of different ways. I've gotten killed. Okay, that's freedom for safety. I definitely made the right choice. I'm way glad I didn't go in there and decide it was gladiator school. But some guys do. I'm not even taking from it. I saw some hard men in prison. I don't want none. I have no problem with that, dude. They say there's those things that you don't call somebody in prison. There's a P word that rhymes with funk, and there's a B word that rhymes with witch. Toss that ass in the middle if you want. If you really want to get up in somebody's face and tell them what you think about them. That dude, the 250-pound of muscle, thinks it's gladiator school and just loves taking somebody's face and putting it against the concrete a couple of times after he's out cold. Cool. I don't want none. He can call me what he wants. I would like to have the freedom to not get called that. I'd rather be safe from getting beaten to death. And so there's no disparagement to the man who decides that, he wants the laws to be harsher. How about 2 strikes and you're out? You do something wrong, we lock you up. And for a good chunk of time. I don't mean something little, you sped. We'll have a different conversation. But you're, oh God, let's pick something I have a lot of contempt for, just so that we know I'm being as fair as I can. Let's say rape. You're a rapist. And you got caught. You did it 4 times that we know of, so you probably did it about 20 total. Plus you worked your way up to it. And so we're going to hit you pretty strong. But we're a liberal society. We believe in, we'll call it the Swedish model. I don't know what it is called. We believe in rehabilitation. Let's say 10 years. I don't know if that's fair or unfair or good or bad. We'd have to talk to the victims to know that. And that's the thing, is legal systems are rarely fair or just. They're legal systems. So let's say 10 years he gets. And we'll do everything for you in that 10 years. You'll get a college education. You'll be well fed. You'll have a counselor who, dude, he's going to call you at night to make sure you didn't do drugs and you went to work that day. For 10 years, we're going to spend money on you like you went to college. But if you get out of second strike and we're going to lock you up and throw away the key, you'll die behind prison and we don't care. I'm not suggesting that's just either, but maybe a middle path. I just worry because I see that pendulum swing, the extreme left and the extreme right argument about how do we fix things. Lock them up forever without Bill Gates' magic checkbook. And forever turns into how much are we spending on them, turns into let them out, turns into they're your neighbor, you barbecue with them. That's just what's happening now. And I'm sure some people in California have noticed it in the past decade or so. A lot of guys are getting out of prison. And, I haven't seen things get too bad. I haven't heard about the crime spiking. I don't know. It'd be an interesting demographic study. Because a lot of these guys getting out are guys that did chunks, 20 years, 25 years, guys that thought they were never going to get out. Guys that whenever they started, it was gladiator school back in the 80s, 90s. I'm glad I did not do time then. Look, I came into High Desert, which is a bad pen. That is a bad pen. 2001. And I went to a softer yard. Not the softest, but softer. It was a 270 level 4. I got lucky as far as that went. One more security designation up, that 180, I would have paroled with a couple of neck tattoos and probably a couple of sticks where they got me whenever they found out that I wasn't with the business like they were. At the very least, nice a fat piece of garbage cut on my face. That's where you get yourself a razor blade or a little sharp piece of steel, and you're not trying to kill the guy. He's not worth picking up that kind of time. But you want everybody who meets him for the rest of his life to know he's a piece of garbage, whatever it is, so that they'll ask, hey, where'd you get that cut from, man? Are you a rat? Did you rape somebody? I mean, what is up with that? And they, oh, good, I have something here. And they'll just take a toothbrush and then take the razor blade and melt it in right there. Hold it in like this and come up and nice, hard, try and get you hereish. Ideally all the way down so that there's no mistaking what happened. That is, interestingly, especially back in the 90s, whenever they were, straight killing folk, that was a polite warning. I'm cool. I don't want none, and I'll pass. I'm going to go ahead and look at some comments and see if I have something interesting to respond to. I wanted to speak on this core concept of rehabilitation for a couple of minutes, so I haven't really been interacting with the audience. Yes, many of the countries that have the more, I'm going to use the word liberal, I don't know what word to use, compassionate perhaps, sentencing agendas have very small populations, and many of them are quite wealthy. Both of those things really help. Thank you, Matthew Alberico. Keep up your solid content. And Timothy Reyna made it to a live stream. Much respect. Shelton Chang came up to say hi. He reminded me that I need to pick up a guitar. It's probably going to be something smaller, like a ukulele or a banjo, but it's about 3, maybe 4 paychecks out. It's going to happen. I'm keeping an eye on pawn shops already. I'm not saying I'm going to be good because I picked up a guitar and I wasn't good. It was too hard on my fingers, but I regret not taking more time to do it. And that's the neat thing about being alive. I got time left, so I'm gonna. Thank you for the reminder. Really weird how you can't use the R word on YouTube. How can you seriously discuss crime without being allowed to use the proper legal words for it? And I would need to actually read all of their community policies to be really clear on what I'm supposed to say or not. I guarantee you it's going to be some kind of mealy-mouthed verbiage. Offends too many people, read community standards. But the long story short is, if it's not salacious, if you're not contributing to the problem, and it's not disturbing. For instance, in one of my videos, I showed somebody dying, and that is a harsh and terrible thing to see, especially without warning. I thought that the situation merited that footage being shown as it was. But yes, you absolutely should have a warning in it. This is graphic. If you have that warning and you're not doing it to contribute to salacious behavior, I don't understand why there would possibly be any community standard for saying rapists are bad people, pedophiles are bad people. And you know what? I hate tossing out that bad people. Is this just me being a sucker? I don't want to call it, look, that rapists and pedophiles are rapists and pedophiles, and they need to be separated from their victims and never allowed to do it again because it ruins lives. Look, honestly, in the same way that murder does to the family members is the way that I would describe it. Murder takes a life, and as such, it is awful. It is the ultimate crime. Sexual assault, the theft of innocence and safety, getting your joy from hurting people, that isn't... sorry. Oh, goodness. If it's not evil, I don't know what it is. And I hate to toss out the word evil, bad, because I have so much compassion. And look, I did time on the SNY yards. I haven't even talked about this. I had a celly, legit rapist, multiple convictions. Hey, I'm not going to use your real name. We'll say B. If you happen to have a contraband cell phone and you're thinking of reaching out, I don't have much help for you. Good guy. I liked him. Studied with him every day. He was smart. He was kind. I had a valley fever, coccidiodemycosis. My hands locked up to the point that they were claws. I couldn't anything. He walked to chow with me every day. We were friends, mind you. And this is in a prison chow hall. And now, mind you, this is SNY. It's not like everybody's chest puffed out. I'm the baddest guy in the room. But this is a prison chow. Folk are going to clown. And he's straight into little squares. And look, dude, are you sure you can eat it yourself? Because I see you having a hard time. I will feed you, man. It was only for a couple of weeks, but that is above and beyond what you expect out of a friend, perhaps even a cellie. B, I may reach out to at some point. I don't know what to say, and I didn't know what to say at the time, because how do you respond to somebody who will freely admit they did that on multiple occasions? Not a mistake, not a I did it and I'm sorry the one time. Did it, got away with it, planned another one, did it, got away with it, planned another one, eventually got caught. His argument would be he was a sex addict, and he was actively engaged in Sex Addicts Anonymous and things like it. And I do consider that to be mitigating. He appeared, and this is from somebody who lived with him. It's hard to lie to the dude you live with. He appeared to be legitimately repentant, legitimately attempting to engage in rehabilitation. I used to listen to Loveline on the radio. It's a show where people would call in, and I just like Dr. Drew. He was so well-spoken, so smart. Whenever I engage in discourse, debate even, I try to remind myself of Dr. Drew, the manner in which he would comport himself. Even whenever people aggressed towards him, it was beautiful. After I lived with him for about a week, he told me, hey, listen, I'm sorry, and I don't mean any disrespect, but I talked to you about the sex addict thing. And he did. Whenever I came in, he legit showed me his paperwork, said, look, this is what I'm in for, and I'm not going to lie about it. And it wasn't pleasant. I didn't read through it, but I was able to look enough to know what it was. Said, I've talked to you about being a sex addict, the problems I have, and how, I've kind of dove into religion head first to try and cope. Please don't play that radio show whenever I came in last night and you were listening to it, and you turned it off after a couple of minutes. But please don't play it around me. I can't be around that kind of thing. Wear headphones if that's on. He was perfectly respectful. It was a reasonable request, and we didn't ever have to talk about it again. But even after all of that, I think he had 7 victims. I'm trying to remember. I did not. This wasn't something I wanted to dwell on. But the MSNY, I signed off. I agreed I would house with people like this whenever I left the main line. I desert the gangs. And the couple of times that I thought, maybe I do owe this dude a letter because we're friends. We lived together for 9 months. He was kind to me. Now, there's 7 women out there. It feels like they get a say. Because in the same way that murder takes a life and then ruins the lives of the family members, look, sexual assault, rape, the theft of innocent, it does not take a life. That is reserved solely for murder, and it's why it's the worst crime. But there is a void, a hole, that theft of innocence. Something is taken. It ruins lives. I don't know if you're supposed to give mitigation to somebody who says that they were sexually assaulted. The defense, well, I wouldn't have done it if it hadn't happened to me. I remember a dorm mate that I had, because a dorm you live with 7 other people or 15 other people, but he was probably 50. He was a shorter Vietnamese man. He came from Vietnam. And he and I were acquainted. And he was rude to me on one occasion. And, I drew the line, hey, don't treat me rudely. And it was a small thing, but you do have to assert. And he respected it, but we ended up talking for a while after that. And he said that he actually does this kind of thing on purpose, where he pokes people in the chest. He aggresses towards them if they're his friends. And And we got talking longer, and well, at the end of a couple of hours of talking, he's crying about how his father did awful things to him, and we don't need any more details. He did awful things to him, and he wouldn't have started using the drugs that were his drugs of choice, meth and PCP, I believe, if that hadn't happened. He's crying about it, and this is a wound that is 40 years old for this man. He's in his 50s talking about things that happened when he was much younger. And it was an interesting epiphany moment for him, where he equated the two. He said, I don't think that I would be sitting in this cell right now if he hadn't done that to me. And I don't know if it's true. But like I said, some people are really good liars, and inmates practice lying on each other all day long. They do. You'll catch them every once in a while. They say it's a criminal college. Inmates lie to each other. So maybe he was just telling a story, but I don't think so. I think this was an honest outpouring, and maybe he's making a defense for himself. But so this cellmate that I had, B, that's 7 women who are walking around with that wound. Maybe they're taking it out in their own way. I doubt they're in prison cells crying about how they wouldn't have done it if. Maybe they are. That's that festering raw type of thing. And I saw a lot of people in prison who had it. It's my theory, and everybody has an opinion. It's my theory that one of the reasons that sexual assault, rape, is so reviled in prison and pedophile, and there are a couple, but one of them is that a lot of guys in prison have been sexually assaulted in one fashion or another. It's a strange thought, and I know that we don't think about the dude who asserts himself all day long with the giant muscles and the covered tattoos, and he would kill anybody who looked at him wrong, as being weak and small. But yes, we start weak and small. And many people respond to that type of assault, that type of aggression, by vowing it will never happen again. They'll just get stronger and stronger. So maybe that's one of the reasons, and I need to be clear about this. Let's not put people into a little pin. Oh my goodness, Aaron said that inmates are all victims of sexual assault. I actually am willing to bet that if you could get honest answers, demographically speaking, it's better than the national average, and the national average is, it is a sad number. I'll go back to reading some comments. I don't know if Norway has criminals like Big Phantom or Jaime Osuna, though, and that is exactly correct. Imagine that one of these very liberal countries, and I don't know which one, let's say Norway. Let's go ahead and say that a group of 40 guys decide to start themselves a new gang. We'll call it the Eastaños. So they're just going to all go to Norway, get matching tattoos, and start recruiting. They'd probably do pretty well, because a system like this, it's not necessarily stable. It's only stable for as long as it's not pushed from an outside influence. Similarly, if you had a one strike and you're out society, just go ahead and break a crime and we're going to lock you up forever. And then they didn't account for something. Perhaps there's a large Amish community and they're not going to stop using their buggies no matter what. And, this has been litigated, believe you me. But now what you've done with your laws, your one strike and you're out, your zero tolerance, is that you've ensured that every single Amish person is going to be locked up for forever. This is the one-size-fits-all, the cookie-cutter solution. I remember a report card from a young age. I think I was maybe in 3rd grade, where the teacher had written, and mind you, I have good grades, I did well, but next to behavior, it says you can't fit a round peg into a square hole. Well, and I get it. Schools have to be square holes. They have to be uniform. Everybody has to go through the school in one door and walk out at the other end. If you're different, it's not going to go great. Okay, that's what it is. Well, prison's the same way. That's the way that bureaucracy likes things. Simple. One answer. One question, one answer. Did you do it? Yes, you're going here. Well, but the reason I did it is. We don't care about the reason you did it. Go. It makes it easier to fill out the columns on the paperwork. Life isn't that simple. I just told a story about a repeat rapist a couple of minutes ago, B. Dude raped 7 women. The way he described it to me, because I didn't want to read the whole paperwork, I just asked him, look, can you tell me how bad this is? He told me, look, I wasn't hiding in the bushes with a buck knife, but I was probably moving in that direction quick. Okay. Well, that's an honest answer, I guess. And I like how he drew the line at the thing he didn't do rather than told me about the things he did. But I told that story. Well, I've got 7 people listening, so I doubt there's more than 1 or 2. But somebody felt some sympathy for that dude. Went, oh, that poor man, because he was trying, to the best of my knowledge. He was neck deep in religion. It's all he studied was, I got to work on my relationship with God, because if I ever do get out, I need to be right with him. That's the way he'd say it, and there was sincerity. I need to be right with him. And he was actively engaged in everything I can think of. If he had said to me, hey, Aaron, I thought of something new I can do to try and make up for what I did wrong, I would have went, no kidding, man. I'm surprised. I thought you'd thought of everything. I sat down and tried to think of things to suggest to you. I just don't know if that cancels out the harm that he's caused. And as such, I don't know how you can, let's say, a 2-strike and you're out society. Well, B did the one thing. He's obviously done everything right. God, this was like 15 years ago. All right. So well, this is like 12 years ago. All right, so he's done 12 years since then. I think he had about 5 years in at the time. Let's say, he did 3-4 years per victim. I guess that's about the way that we said the Swedish system would work. I don't feel comfortable saying that he's paid his debt. How about me? Look, I was sentenced to 19 years and 8 months, and we can talk about all the mitigating factors, what I did or didn't do. That's not the way the law works. I did what I was convicted of. What I was convicted of, as I recall, was taking a very large rock out of my pocket, hitting Donald Perez, a gentleman who had come to my community, in the back of the head, and then whenever he was taken down the hill and executed, supervising his truck being taken from the crime scene. That has honestly almost no relation to facts. There was a truck, the name is right, but that's what I pled to. It's in the court documents, and if I happen to go to some court proceeding, they don't care about the why or the specifics. And if I say, well, that's not really what happened, well, no, this was the deal I made. I was sentenced to 19 years and 8 months for that crime. Putting aside the conversation about mitigation or whether I paid my sentence to society or whether I rehabilitated myself, what about just a conversation about what I owe? Because under this law, I was charged with murder, willingly taking a man's life for any reason. And I stood in a court and I said, guilty pursuant to the People versus West, Your Honor. All right, so there we go. I agree that I did it. And we can talk about, what I actually did, the crime. I believe I did 11 years for carjacking, 2.5 years for manslaughter, 2 years for robbery. I got hit with 6 charges, and the DA expressed it. Look, I wanted to add up to 20 years. I don't care what the charges are. All right. Is that enough? What if I did the whole 20? What if I tried the whole 20? Does that justify a man's life? Took his wind. He went cold. Sammy the Bull has a YouTube channel. I saw this. I can't believe it. And it makes sense. Sammy the Bull of Gravano is a hitman for the mob. And he got a sweetheart deal because he really rolled. And, okay, I don't even care about the specifics, but he's famous, infamous, I'm not sure, but he has interesting stories to tell. People are interested to hear him. It's just the gravity behind this concept of taking a man's life. Whether it's vigilante justice, murder, execution, even under the aegis of the state. Remember I said earlier, well, you can use a rope 200 times. All right, we can fix that crime problem fast if we have to. Well, those men are still dead. Death doesn't end. And I realize that this is a concept that we as adults have grasped to some degree. Life is fleeting. Value it. Go not gently into that good night. Okay. So what is the price for having taken a man's life then, if we all agree that life is sacred? That if the state is going to execute somebody, they'd better spend years investigating that they deserve to die. You can't just take them back to the courthouse. It only takes a jury 2 hours to convict. Let's hang them quick. Generally, as a society, we've made that agreement. I think about the root word of penitentiary is, of course, penitent. In the early days of the U.S., there were 2 prison models. I don't remember the words for them, but it's basically work yourself to salvation and pray yourself to salvation is what we can call them, or isolation and labor. One group is the chain gang. That's the labor. And what they would do is they'd say, okay, you wake up in the morning, you leave your isolated cell, and you work. And you will find redemption in your work. Right labor is a good thing. You're going to go break rocks for the state to pay for some of your debt. And at the end of the day, you go back to your bed. Don't worry, we'll feed you. That was the one logic. And then the other was, well, why are we letting them out of their cells at all? It's not a matter of right labor. It's a matter of penance. We need to get them into the cell and just leave them there with a Bible and some time to pray. They'll figure it out. Either way sounds awful to me. Just awful. But they do speak to the different ways that I guess you can torture somebody under societal approval without killing them. We can go ahead and take either of those and put it in a one strike and you're out society. Well, we can have that labor. The prisons would build themselves. It's what happened in Russia under Stalin, the Gulag state. You arrest enough people and you tell them, build prisons for the rest of your life. We don't care if that's 3 days or 30 years, but you better build them good or it's going to be on the short end. And you just keep doing that and throwing equipment at it. And, well, the prisons build themselves is the way it feels to the state, and the crime goes away too. So at the end of the day, it has to be a moral question. Because we live in this society. We live in the one strike you're out society, the 2 strike and you're out society. And we've agreed that, you know what, innocent people go to prison. It does suck, but it happens. That's not a reason to get rid of the law, the fact that an innocent rapist went to prison. And I mean, the DNA had him right, and he had 3 expert testimonies, and he had 2 eyewitnesses, and then later on he won an appeal, and it turns out it was all lies. He got set up. And this kind of thing has happened. And that's why vigilante justice is such a dangerous idea, because without the investigative procedure, well, somebody else would have just called him a piece of garbage and given him that nice piece of garbage cut so everybody knew he was a rapist before the appeal went through. At the end of the day, you have to ask what kind of society you want to live in. Because we do live in this society. It's why we check the organ donor card or don't. It's because we feel we should and we think other people should. The little organ donor box on your ID. 100 other little things like that. You let somebody into traffic in front of you. It's not just because you're trying to be nice to them, though of course it is. You know, you might see the woman driving past trying to get her kids to school, and yeah, you were happy to let her have your spot. Absolutely. She might be in a hurry. She might be tired. But it's also because we want to live in a society where people treat each other like this. It's that golden rule, treat each other as you would wish to be treated. Or perhaps to extend it a step further is treat each other as you would wish to be treated were you in their shoes with their perceptions, etc. I'm not going to wrap up with a simple answer. I know I started with Bill Gates waving around his magic checkbook so that we could have any prison system that we wanted. And the reason that I started thinking about that was partially a comment in the comment section, how prisons should run, whether they should be nice places. But it was also partially because of a live stream that I saw, which was just great. And because I'm tired and my throat is scratching, I can't remember the gentleman's name. I'm going to put it in the comments. This was his first live stream, and he spoke so eloquently that I asked him the question because I thought he might have an answer. He's speaking about prisons and doing time, and then I got to thinking to myself, and of course there isn't an answer. That's the whole thing I've been saying. There isn't a simple answer to complex questions. Should prisons be nice places? Hell if I know. That's above my pay grade. I did my time. I learned everything I could there. That's what I can say about prison, is that Robert Stroud, the Birdman of Alcatraz, who perhaps has been a little bit aggrandized in the media. He had a couple of books written about him. They did a film, and it's funny because he did most of his time not in Alcatraz. He was the Birdman of Leavenworth, thank you. But he said in an interview, I have never served a day of time because I have made that time serve me. Yeah. I tried. And I like to think that I walked out with maybe something to talk about, and I get to share it with a couple of people who are happy to listen. So I suppose I'll close by saying again that there are not simple answers to complex questions, especially not ones like, well, should prisons be nice places? Because I just spoke about it for an hour, and I don't think I'm any closer to an answer. And also close by saying thank you to my audience again. And I think I'm just going to keep doing it because I'm sincerely grateful. I used to watch YouTube videos and the guy would say, hey, thank you guys. I love you so much. And it feels forced. Thank you for listening. This is great to get to do this. And maybe we'll keep talking and someday somebody will have the answer to should prisons be nice places. Shout out in the comments if you've got one, because I don't. I'm going to go ahead and close now. Thank you for listening for a second time.